Hi, my name is Aya. You're watching Aya Reads, and I'm here to talk about my favorite books I read per month. So I already did my favorite books I read of 2023, which I'll leave linked for you. But this is basically just telling you my favorite I read in each month of the year. Some of them obviously will overlap because I've had a couple of months where I didn't have any five-star reads. I will talk about my favorite of that month. And on the flip side, I've had months where I've had like 4 or 5 favorites of the year. So obviously, since I only can choose one, there are definitely a lot of books that I'm not talking about here that I did talk about in my favorite books of the year. So if you're done watching this one, definitely go and check that other video out. So let's start with January. My favorite book I read in January was Witches Get Stitches by Juliet Cross. This year, I really made a concerted effort to finish this series, and I did. I believe I read the first 2 books in 2022, and I started 2023 off with a bang because this is one of my favorite books I read this year, and it was definitely my favorite I read in January. So this is the third book. It follows Nico and Violet, and Nico is the cousin of the hero from the first book, and Violet is the sister from the heroine in the first book. And they had a steamy night together 2 years ago, and then she left and never really talked to him since. And he, even though he knows she's his mate, he kind of leaves it be until his cousin and her sister get together, obviously, and now they are forced around each other again. And in this book, he's determined to make her see that they do belong together. But she's a seer, and she had this vision that once they get together, disaster will ensue. She kept him at a distance, but now they are even more in forced proximity when they start a tattoo shop together, and feelings finally blossom. They get together, and I really, really loved it. First of all, werewolf stories are one of my favorite stories. Werewolves are my favorite paranormal creature, so I always have a soft spot for werewolf romances. And Nico was a great one, and I really did enjoy Violet. I love how extroverted she is and how funny she is too. And I really just enjoyed this. I enjoyed this series overall, but this is definitely my favorite I read in that series and my favorite I read in January. In February, I started a manga series that I fell in love with, and it's the Spy Family series by Tatsuya Endo. I picked it up. I knew I heard a lot of good things about it. I just figured, let's just read it. I'm probably gonna have a good time, but I ended up loving it with my whole heart and soul. This is such a great series. It's so heartwarming. I love almost every character in this series, and this one started it all. Obviously, basically, Spy Family, you follow this spy who's tasked to go to a different country to get close to a controversial political figure, and he's a very reclusive person, but he does have a son in this prestigious academy. Twilight, who's the spy, has to get a fake wife and a fake child to enroll this child into this academy, so he accomplishes that. But what he doesn't know, sorry, I thought I heard something. What he doesn't know is that his wife is secretly an assassin and his daughter is secretly a mind reader. And they don't, the only one who knows what is up is the daughter, obviously, because she's a mind reader. And I really loved it. Like I said, I fell in love with this series. I will continue reading this series until the very last volume. And this is definitely going to be a manga series that I'm going to be rereading over and over again. And I really love it. March is Highlander Most Wanted by Maya Banks. So this is the second and unfortunately last book in this series. The first one is Never Seduce a Scot, and that book is one of my favorite books of all time. And this book, you actually follow the hero from the first book. You follow his brother. And because of events that happened in the first book, Graham, who's the laird, acquires this different place, and he asks his brother Bowen to go and be like the stand-in laird. And Bowen is this like beautiful man. Everybody thinks that he's gorgeous. And there's this girl there, Genevieve, who is very scarred. Like, she has a scar on her face. So she obviously thinks that he'll never love her, and she's been so traumatized because of things that happened. But they do end up falling in love. And this was so beautiful. I love Maya Banks' writing. I love her historical romances, kind of savoring them because I know that she hasn't written a book in years. This might have actually been her last one. So yeah, she hasn't written a book in years. This was supposed to have 2 more books in the series, but it never got published. but I really, really love this book. And if you've not read this series yet, I would highly, highly recommend starting with Never Seduce a Scot, because you actually cannot read this one. Well, you can, but it will majorly spoil Never Seduce a Scot, and that book is so amazing that I really want you to read that one as well. My favorite book I read in April was Untouchable by Sam Mariano. This is a dark romance. I'm gonna lay it out on the table for you, so definitely steer clear of this if you're uncomfortable with anything I'm talking about. Basically, you follow Carter and Zoe was assaulted by one of the football players, so she tells, and because of that, the whole town turns against her. And then one day, that football player plus Carter plus another football player corner her in a classroom, and Carter also assaults her. And the next day she's out sick, she doesn't want to face anybody, and then Carter actually shows up at her door with soup and charming her mom, and she is very confused and just wants him to leave her alone, but he doesn't because he's very intrigued by her. So he starts coming to her job and just infiltrating her life. At the end of the day, she does end up falling in love with him. He's a sociopath and she just wants to get into his mind. This is told in single point of view. So alongside Zoe, the reader also wants to know what's up with this guy. Why does he do the things he does? And I really love this book. Like I said, is it for everybody? Definitely not. So you have been warned, but I was so interested in Carter. I was so intrigued by him. Sam Mariano is a great storyteller in my opinion. I could not stop thinking about this book the whole year. It was my favorite of April, but definitely also my favorite of the year. I would highly recommend it, but like I said, heed the warnings, because don't read this book and then complain about it, because it has been laid out on the table for you. Go in cautiously, but if you know that you can handle the subject matter, definitely read it. Okay, so actually, Sam says it in the author's note. Carter Mahoney is not a comfortable hero, and this is not always a comfortable love story. If you need safe, good guy heroes in every romance you read, this is not the story for you. So yeah, I think that sums it up very well, but I really loved it. My favorite book I read in May was Top Secret by Serena Bowen and Elle Kennedy. In fact, I read it in May and then I reread it in June. That is how much I loved it. Basically, this is a male-male romance, and you follow Luke and Keaton has a girlfriend at the beginning of this book, and she wants to have a threesome with another man, and he, since he's such a good boyfriend, he obliges. He goes on this kink app to find another man, and while he's on there, he starts talking to somebody, and while they're talking, he starts exploring more of his own sexuality, and then one day they meet up to have this threesome, and then they realize that the person they've been talking to is actually their frat brother and roommate that they hate. So after that gets revealed, they have to confront everything that happened. They have to confront their own feelings, and their romance starts. This was so good. I really loved this love story. I loved how this was opposites attract. I loved Luke in this book. I thought he was such an interesting character, but I also really loved Keaton. He was such a golden retriever hero. I thoroughly enjoyed it, and these are characters that really have stuck with me because, like I said, I was thinking about this book so much that I just had to reread it the next month, and I probably would have reread this book every single month if I did not stop myself. It is easy to reread because it's very short. It is less than 300 pages, so you just fly through it. But I just really loved it, and it was definitely my favorite I read in May. And then in June, I read a lot of the Kingmaker series by Sophie Lark. I'm pretty sure I read the second, the third, and the fourth one, maybe even the fifth one in June. And my absolute favorite was 100% The Bully. In fact, I started reading Sophie Lark specifically to get to this book, and this did not disappoint, even though my expectations for it were sky high. This is basically a Draymini love story in a way. And I do have to say, you cannot read this book without having read the entire Brutal Birthright series by her, plus the first two in her Underworld series and the first two in her Kingmaker series. And if you don't want to do all that, even though I think you should, because all those other books are amazing as well, then definitely you have to start with the first book in the Kingmakers and the second book in the Kingmakers. Otherwise, this will not make any sense. This follows Dean and Kat, and Dean has been a villain in the first two books, especially in the first one. And in the second book, he sees Kat doing something, and now he has leverage over her, and he wants her to be his sex slave for a month. So she agrees, first of all, because she doesn't want him to tell her secret, but also she's been intrigued by him for a while now. They end up discovering more about themselves, and they fall in love. And this I really, really loved. I loved Kat. I loved Dean. I thought Dean was such an interesting, dynamic character. Kat starts off as this shy, mousy heroine, but she really blossoms in this book. I really loved watching Dean, not just their love story, but also Dean has been struggling through so much, and watching him deal with that was also interesting. This book has beautiful illustrations in it as well. All Sophie Lark books do. And I fell in love with Sophie Lark in 2022 and 2023. Cannot wait to read more by her, but this book is definitely my favorite by her and my favorite I read in the month that I read it in. And even though The Spy I also really loved, The Bully is definitely my favorite out of those two. Then in July is Heartless by Elsie Silver. So 2023 was also the year I started the Chestnut Spring series. And even though there are books that I loved a little bit more than Heartless, I read them in the months where other books it ended up being my favorite. So, and Heartless I did really love. Basically, Chestnut Springs follows the Eaton family and each of their love stories. And Heartless follows the oldest Eaton man, and it's Cade, who's a single dad, and this is a single dad nanny romance. Cade needs a nanny and he cannot hire one because he's stuck up and he only wants the best for his son. So Summer, the heroine from the first book, tells him he should hire Willa, her best friend, because she's not really doing anything for the summer. So he obliges, but he's also very attracted to Willa. So there starts their grumpy sunshine romance. The stoic hero and the heroine who just blurts out anything that she thinks of. And this was so good. I love watching her with Luke. I love watching her with Cade. And I just love single dad nanny romances. In fact, there's going to be another single dad nanny romance I'm going to talk about in this video. I can definitely see why a lot of people really love this book and this series. And I'm so glad I discovered Elsie Silver this year. But yeah, my favorite I read in July is 100% Heartless. Then in August, I had so many favorite books I read in August, which is great because August is actually my birthday month. So yeah, I had a couple amazing books that I read, but my favorite was, of course, The Right Move by Liz Ford. This is just an amazing book in my opinion. I fell in love with this one. This one I read for my sports romance vlog, and in it I actually read another favorite. So I just had, like I said, an amazing reading month in August. This book is the second book in the Windy City series by Liz Ford. You follow Ryan and Indy, and Ryan is this world famous basketball player, and he recently has been named captain, but his general manager doesn't think he's a very good captain because he's only focused on the sport and doesn't really have a personal life. So he decides to tell him that he does have a girlfriend, which is Indy, so that it's actually a fake dating. But the reason Indy comes to mind is because Indy's boyfriend recently cheated on her and now she needs a place to live, and her best friend Stevie tells her brother Ryan to take her in, so he reluctantly agrees. Even though he's very set on his privacy, he doesn't really want this crazy girl who he had some awful, like, weird interactions with in the first book to blast into his life. But like I said, he agrees, but they make some ground rules that she needs to save up as much of her money so that she can move out as soon as possible. But then they fall in love, and I just really love this book. I love the roommate turned lover trope. I love the fake dating trope, and I really love the quiet love that Ryan has for Indy, but also for the people he cares about. The little things that he does for her before they even start falling in love, that just shows that he cares. I really loved it. It's so good. If you've not read this book, I would highly recommend it. It's definitely my favorite I read in August, and definitely a favorite of the year. It is, like, I'm so glad that I read this book. Now for September is the only book that I actually don't own, and it's Murder in the Family. This is actually a mystery, and I have been meaning to read, I've been just in the mood for mysteries lately, and in September I actually picked it up because the reason why I picked this one over others in September, even though September was not my best reading month, I didn't have any 5 stars, I don't think. The reason why I love this one so much is because I really loved the reading experience of it. I really immersed myself in this book because I both read it physically and listened to the audiobook because the audiobook was really great. And Meg with Books actually did an entire video trying to solve this, and she actually divided her video up in a way where I could actually stop and then read a section and then watch her video again. So that experience just made me fall in love with the reading experience of this book. So I do have to say, I don't read a whole lot of mysteries, so it could be that I just loved it because I haven't read a whole lot, but I do have to say the reading experience is really why I just fell in love with this. So yeah, I still, like, remember things very vividly because of the way I read it. October was a great month because 2 of my most anticipated releases came out, and one of them is actually my favorite, and it's Caught Up by Liz Somford. Once again, a book in the Windy City series. This follows The Right Move, and I was even though I was excited about this one, I was also very hesitant because I knew that no book could really overtake The Right Move for me, and this didn't. I still love The Right Move more than Caught Up, but I did really love this one. This is another single dad nanny romance. Kai has been firing nannies left and right. He's a baseball player, and the nannies have to travel with them, and he needs to, even though he's a dad, obviously he also needs to focus on his sport, so his coach gets tired of his shit, so he sticks his daughter on Kai, telling him that he needs to hire his daughter and she needs to be the nanny. So he does, but they also have this like really awkward interaction where he thinks that she is not really reliable. So when he finds out that she's actually going to be the nanny, he's not excited about it at all, but he does agree because it's his coach or his coach's daughter. She goes with them on the road and they fall in love, but their romance has a time limit because this is only her sabbatical. She's a world-renowned pastry chef and she needs to go to California by the end of the summer. So they know that there's an expiration date to their romance. But this was so good. Once again, I just love single dad nanny romances. I loved watching her fall in love with Maxie. Loved watching her fall in love with Kai. And Kai was such a good guy. I just really loved him. I just loved the way he loved Max, how he would do anything for Max. I loved watching him with Miller and the things he does for her, and I just really loved seeing all the other couples in this book as well. This is my first baseball romance, will definitely not be my last, and I really enjoyed this book. In November, I did the Goodreads Choice video, and I really loved a lot of books I read for that video, but my favorite book I read for that video and my favorite book I read in November was Wildfire by Hannah Gray. So this is a sequel to Icebreaker. And even though Icebreaker was a very popular book last year, I just wasn't, like, I knew I was probably gonna be reading it one day, but I was not that hyped about it as everybody else. So this one was in the top 10. I was tentatively excited. I didn't really have any expectations for this book. And then I read it and I fell in love. This follows Russ and Aurora, and they actually meet at this hockey party to celebrate the end of the school year. These are college students, by the way. So there they actually have a one-night stand, but she leaves before he comes back from the bathroom. And then they actually meet each other again at this summer camp where they're both counselors. And there's this rule where there's a no fraternization policy between the staff members. So that means that even though they did have a one-night stand, it actually turns into a very slow burn romance. And I just enjoyed it. I loved Russ. He was such a sweet guy. He was such a cinnamon roll, and I just fell in love with him. And Aurora was such a great character as well. I loved how feisty she was, but how much and how deeply she cared as well. They both have problems with their fathers, but they manifest in completely different ways. And I just really loved it. Like, I fell in love with this book, and I cannot wait to read Icebreaker and to read what else Hannah Grace has in store for the future. And then last but most certainly not least, my favorite book I read in December was Manacled by Senlin Yu. So this is actually a fan fiction, and I knew when I started it was probably gonna be, well, not when I started it actually, because it took me, so this book is actually told in 3 parts, and it took me a very long time to read the first part. So basically a first part, flashbacks, and then you get back to the present. And with the flashbacks, I just fell in love with this story. This is so heartbreaking. Basically, this is a Draco and Hermione fan fiction. This is an alternate universe where in the 5th year, Draco actually kills Dumbledore. And now it's years later, the resistance has lost. Almost everybody died. And Voldemort has won, and he's the ruler of all. But pure blood families have not been having any children, so now they actually use Muggleborns for the pureblood wizards to rape and have children with. So basically this is a Harry Potter / Handmaid's Tale book, and it was so good. This was such a masterpiece in my opinion. There are some quotes in here that I will be thinking about for years. In fact, this book will be living rent-free in my mind for the rest of time, I'm pretty sure. I fell in love with it. This was so well written. It was better written than a lot of traditionally published books, in my opinion. This was so good. And I'm a sucker for Hermione. I've always loved Draco and Hermione. I think that is such a great pairing, to be honest. And this book did it wonderfully. I'm very much looking forward to reading more fan fictions in 2024. I actually read 3, I believe, in 2023, and this one was definitely my favorite, and it was definitely my favorite I read in December. So yes, these were all my favorite books I read per month. Definitely let me know in the comments below if you've read any of these books and what your thoughts were. Also, I'd really love to know some of your favorites you read in any month. Honestly, leave all your thoughts down below, and I really hope you enjoyed this video. Definitely let me know by leaving a like if you did, and thank you so much for watching. Have a wonderful rest of your day, and I'll talk to you later. Bye.